Now, what's most mystifying to me is that not just did the Chinese government hide this information from the world, they hid it from their own people, leading to thousands of people catching the virus during the crucial 6 days when there was so much intermingling happening on account of the Chinese Lunar New Year, now proven through hard documents. Joining us on this broadcast live, a voice from Beijing, Contagion, joins us. He's an independent advisor to the Chinese government on economic and development matters. Rahul Kanwal is one of India's foremost experts on China. He's a research professor in the National Security Studies at the Center for Policy Research. Contagion, I want to come to you first, sir. You're looking at what's happening inside China. The rest of the world is very upset with the fact that China lied and hid this information. But now these documents suggest that this crucial delay from the 14th of January to the 20th of January was hidden from the Chinese people as well, allowing them to intermingle at a time of massive national festivity and allowing this virus to spread within the country. Why do you think that happened? What's your sense?
Well, I think, first off, I mean, this kind of conspiratorial tone is wrong. This was a virus that we still do not understand today. And at this point, you're saying that the Chinese had full knowledge of everything that we have learned to date. I think that's a little bit pushing it. So when you get right down to it, they had different reports. They looked at it. The local governments were responsible for this idea of continuing the festivities prior to the Lunar New Year. And as soon as the national government had assurances that this was, in fact, a very serious situation, they acted on it. But, you know, we're talking about January 20th. Now, let's look at the time between that day and today. And I think you can see quite clearly that there are a number of governments who feel a little bit taken aback that they did not, in fact, prepare for what has happened. And as a result, now I think many of them are looking for a scapegoat, especially Donald Trump. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a 57-page report written by the O'Donnell Associates, which says, don't defend Donald Trump, attack China. The basis of his whole re-election campaign is pushed on that. And I think, to a certain extent, the international press has kind of swallowed this whole, that this idea that China is a villain in this, that rather than not understanding it as we do today, that China had full knowledge at the time that it was reported and that this was somehow delivered.
So let's take your defense one by one, and I'll put those questions to Rahul Kanwal. Defense number one is, forget trying to blame the Communist Party. If something happened, it's at the local level. Xi Jinping did not know. And secondly, even after countries like Italy, Spain found out.
Not saying not knowing is not the same thing as receiving reports. He receives reports from many different entities, as does your Prime Minister Modi. He receives reports from different departments, and he has to weigh them. But it's not something that he knows instantly the moment some report comes in. Okay. So it's very important.
I hear what you're saying. Let me put that question to Rahul Kanwal.
This is a case, a new case.
The sum of what you're saying is, even several weeks later, when Italy and Spain knew what had happened in China, and when a country like the United States also had a full sense of what had happened, they still couldn't stop it. So why blame Xi Jinping? Why blame the Communist Party? That's not fair. Rahul Kanwal, your opening counter.
Well, look, I think from the very beginning there was a suspicion that this was a biological weapon. It has many attributes of a biological weapon of mass destruction. And the first reports came out of Holland at the time. And the question really is whether or not this suspicion is borne out by the, some kind of evidence. Now, as I said, it has many of the attributes of a biological weapon because the source is very localized, Wuhan, and it has now been identified as a laboratory. Whether it's been run by the PLA or some other entity, we don't know that.
If it's a biological weapon, why would they unleash it on their own people? Why would they unleash it on their own people first?
No, I think it was not unleashed. It was inadvertent. It was inadvertently leaked, and they were unable to control it. And that makes for a good explanation as to why they wanted to sit on it and why they didn't want the information to get out. And finally, when they did get hold of it, by then the virus had spread, and the rest of the world was becoming aware of the problem that originating from Wuhan. So this is the reason why there is ample reason for suspicion.
In our Contagion response to Bharat Karnad, this is a view that's gaining ground in strategic circles, that the one possible theory which fits in nicely is that the reason why China never admitted even to their own people is because this was a biological weapon that got leaked by mistake, and therefore they wanted to keep it hidden from the world and from their own people.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting theory, but if that's the case, then France was involved, because the Wuhan biological center was a joint venture that was manned by both French and Chinese. The French have already come out very, very strongly, categorically denying that there was that this was a man-made virus, despite my colleagues' attempt to say that it has attributes. The scientific evidence is that it is not. And if you check Nature, Lancet, or whatever, they'll confirm that. So, I mean, this idea that it was man-made is fallacious. It's false. And the second, that it was somehow leaked from Wuhan, when the fact this would require the French to have been involved. I don't know exactly why they would be complicit with China in unleashing and then making some sort of excuse is beyond me.
Bharat Karnad, respond to this. This is the
kind of far-fetched fantasies that you have. I mean, in the U.S. right now, there's a poor lady who attended the games, the military games in China, and she's now being blamed as the source for the coronavirus, although the fact is she never had it. So this is the kind of stuff that the internet spreads, these kind of theories without any kind of factual backing.
So Bharat Karnad, respond to NR Tenjan's point, one, that Donald Trump is facing a massive backlash back home in the United States, which is why he's now pushing this theory that this is a biological weapon that got leaked, because that's his only ticket to re-election, which is why it's gaining more and more traction. Whereas, and NR Tenjan is correct, every serious medical expert we've spoken to, including the editor-in-chief of the Lancet Medical Journal, Ian Lipkin, who's a world-known virologist, all of them say, from the evidence they have at hand, this doesn't seem to be a man-made virus.
Well, look, what's being done by Trump is really irrelevant to the locus genesis of the virus. The fact of the matter is, maybe it is the French, the center has been run by the French and the Chinese in some kind of a cooperative venture. But the thing is, we have no idea. I mean, unless it's disclosed somewhere and it's available, I haven't seen it, about the French role in this. And what exactly is the programmatic overlap between the French and the Chinese? I mean, how are their research programs being there? What is it that along the lines
which
of
is why, and I completely agree with Bharat Karnad, NR Tenjan, an international probe is required. You need to allow international scientists to come into that Wuhan virus laboratory and see what's up. China is telling us that this is not a man-made virus. Now, that may be true. It doesn't mean that they weren't experimenting with some natural virus and that virus got leaked. So it's only a half-baked defense. Man didn't make that virus. That seems true from the genetic sequence. It does not mean that this wasn't one of the natural viruses they were tweaking around with, and that virus accidentally got leaked. That can only be established if China were to allow an international probe, which you keep saying no to. If there's nothing wrong and there's nothing to hide of fear, why not allow an international team of scientists?
Well, let's set the record straight. I'm an American citizen, so it's not a we situation.
Sure.
In terms of an international investigation, the issue here is you do not want a jury verdict before there is a trial. And right now, what you have is these half-baked ideas, these questions.
Who's the jury? Who's conducting this trial, Mr. Tenjan?
No.
I'm saying, unless an international team comes in, at this moment, China is the judge, China is the jury, China is the advocate on both sides, and it's only the Communist Party. That doesn't sound like much of a trial. I don't know what's going to come out of this trial.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it's the other way around. It's a lot of accusations. I mean, my colleague here is woefully ignorant of the fact that this was a joint venture between the Chinese and the French, and that they would have had to been implicitly involved in any kind of leak of it. They would have to disclose that they were doing this kind of research. Now, it has been already ascertained by WHO and by the French, who have issued a report. I suggest he read it, all right, that says that they were not involved and that this kind of research wasn't going on. The fact is, there are these research laboratories all around the world. Since
the WHO also said that there's no problem in traveling to China, don't issue advisories. The WHO, the whole while, Bharat Karnad, has been firmly on China's side, and that seems to be part of the problem, which is why the WHO's international credibility itself, Bharat Karnad, at this moment lies in smithereens.
I can understand that you want to cast doubt on the WHO, but that is the very organization which is protecting the world from these types of incidents. They're the only coordinating body. So if you want to blame the doctor for your sickness, that's fine. You can do that. But I don't think it's rational. All right. The fact is the WHO is not in league with China. It's not in league with the French. It has no reason to want to, quote, hide anything. In terms of an international investigation, the question is, how do you do it? The logical one would be the WHO, to have them come in and do an investigation. I think China would be open to that.
Why hasn't that been allowed so far? You haven't allowed the UN or WHO to come in. Instead, the government in China has said, has said they don't want any international problem. If there is no issue with an international investigation, shouldn't the government in China allow the World Health Organization or a UN monitored team to come in, Mr. Tanjay?
Okay, so here's the question to you. Why do Indians come clean about beating their wives? I mean, the question phrased in such a way that you all have already decided that China has something to hide. And this is why, on a nationalist basis, if this situation was reversed, and countries were saying, why won't India confess to the fact that it's hiding the fact, all of this information about a COVID virus? I mean, there would be tremendous amounts of, dissatisfaction, real problems with this kind of approach. And that's what you're dealing with.
I don't understand. I don't think I hear you, but I let Bharat Karnad respond to that. He's talking about beating wives. He's talking about India also not allowing international people in. We're not being suspected of allowing a pandemic to run loose. Bharat Karnad, respond to him.
Yeah. The point, I think, is that China is a closed society. That's the difference. It has had a record of some 70 years of being a closed society, an authoritarian, totalitarian system. So we simply don't know what happens within China. And because it's a closed system, we have to take their government's word for whatever happens. And that's the point, isn't it? I mean, in India, whatever the government may say here or profess, you will always have the media or the press or the foreign press reporting on it, and things getting out of the government's control in terms of information, controlling the information flow. That's not the case with China. China pretty much sits on whatever the information it doesn't want the world to know. What information is known is because Beijing allows it. And that's a fact of life, isn't it? And that's the reason for really the reason why there are all these suspicions about this virus, perhaps unintentionally, inadvertently, but something nevertheless leaking out of a laboratory working on this.
So in the midst of all of this, I want to tell our viewers that there's been another twist to the corona war. As one after another countries start calling out China over the origin of the virus, India's National Security Council has now started a comprehensive internal assessment of the COVID virus and the possibility of this being made in a lab in Wuhan. Shivarur has the details.
Did the novel coronavirus escape from this Chinese laboratory in Wuhan? Once just a whisper of conspiracy, the theory is now the subject of a full-fledged probe by the United States. And now, in an explosive new development, India today has learned that India's very own national security setup has started a comprehensive internal assessment of the origin of the novel coronavirus. And the assessment very much includes the possibility that the virus escaped from a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan. India launched its assessment of COVID-19 in March, well ahead of the Trump administration's decision to launch a full-fledged hunt for viral origins. The Indian assessment covers all aspects, including viral origins, and is going with 3 possibilities. Other than a natural infection, the possibilities being looked at are a biological warfare experiment and a vaccine experiment gone wrong. With India publicly junking Chinese rapid test kits, relations are already delicate. Whether India's viral origin assessment expands into a full-fledged probe is unclear at this time. The diplomatic fallout of such probes is already quaking through the region though. China and Australia are locked in an ugly diplomatic collision after Australia has not only called for Chinese transparency in the origins of coronavirus, but also an independent probe.
Well, I think such an inquiry is important, and we can respectfully have a difference of view from that's been put by China. The virus began in China, in Wuhan. That's, I think, well understood. It's important for public health globally that there is a transparency in the way that you can get access to this important information early. So it's not pursued as an issue of criticism. It's pursued as an issue of importance for public health.
The so-called independent investigation proposed by Australia is virtually political manipulation, which is unpopular and disrupts international cooperation in the epidemic prevention. At this critical moment, it is quite irresponsible to make unfounded, suspicious and unwarranted accusations for political purpose. We admonish Australia, cast away ideological prejudice and political manipulation, genuinely focus on the well-being of the Australian people and the public health and safety of people around the world.
The China-Australia face-off is being monitored very closely by India. While the Modi government has so far focused on containing the spread, could India's strategic interests look to corner China on an issue that has bled the world? The most obvious question is, will India convert the National Security Council's internal assessment into a full-fledged official probe? Could India's Foreign Office join the global call for Chinese transparency on viral origins? And what will the impact be on diplomatic relations? With the world's gaze now fixed on this virology lab in Wuhan, the question is, can an increasingly isolated China be forced to stop covering up and speak the truth? Bureau Report, India Today.
China has been hoping that it can use this opportunity to try and send medical equipment, PPE, masks to the world in a bid to further its global domination.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.